Nathan Wade was 40 years old, and he had spent most of his adult life learning how to make things move, freight, cargo, people, across distances, on time. He drove a 6-year-old Buick. He wore the same gray jacket on morning walkthroughs that he'd had for 3 years because it had deep pockets and he liked what fit in them. On a Thursday afternoon in mid-September, he boarded Meridian Air Flight 118 from Atlanta to Miami the way he always did when he flew his own routes, early, quietly, without announcement. He settled into row 3, window seat. He set his notebook on his knee. He ordered his coffee before the galley closed. 12 minutes later, he watched his wife board the plane. She was not alone. She didn't look past row 1. The man beside her had his hand at the small of her back. They took 1A and 1B and settled in like two people who had done this before. Nathan looked at the logo pressed into the headrest cover directly in front of him. The stylized M. He had approved that mark in a Tuesday meeting 6 years ago. He looked at it for a moment. Then, he opened his notebook. She had no idea whose airline she was sitting on. That was about to become the most important thing either of them couldn't take back. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee on Meridian Air Flight 118 was the same coffee Nathan had approved during vendor selection, 2 medium roast, from a Georgia company he had sampled 3 times before signing the contract. He knew this without thinking about it. He knew most things about Meridian Air without thinking about them. That was what 14 years of building something from the ground up does to a man. Nathan Wade had started as an aircraft maintenance technician at a regional charter company in his mid-20s. He had a gift for operations, the particular intelligence that reads a process as a system, identifies where the system breaks, and fixes it before the break costs someone something they can't recover. By 31, he was running logistics for a 3-plane charter carrier. By 35, he and 2 partners had incorporated Meridian Air Group, LLC, and put their first aircraft on the tarmac. His name was not on the planes or the terminal signage. It was on the incorporation documents, the FAA registrations, the commercial operating certificates, the places that mattered and that most people never thought to look. He measured twice, cut once, in everything. Renee had known him as a logistics executive. That was the phrase she used at dinner parties when someone asked what her husband did. She delivered it with the precise tone of someone who has learned to be comfortable with a fact they once wished were different. He had never corrected her. There had never seemed to be a reason. There was one now. The cabin smelled of recirculated air and fresh coffee. Afternoon light came through the left side windows at a low, flat angle. Row 1 was 4 feet from where Nathan was sitting. She came through the door at 4:23 p.m. Nathan had boarded at 4:08. He saw her before she cleared the galley. She was dressed to travel well. A camel coat he didn't recognize. A rolling carry-on he'd never seen in the closet they shared. She was talking to the man beside her, head tilted, smiling at something he'd just said. The particular smile she used when she wanted to seem effortless. The man wore his suit the way men wear things they've been told look expensive. He placed his hand at the small of her back as the flight attendant directed them to 1A and 1B. She settled in without looking back. Nathan looked at the Meridian M on the headrest cover in front of him. He didn't stand. He didn't say her name. He picked up his pen and he wrote 3 lines in his notebook. Operational notes for the Miami meeting. The same notes he'd been planning to write when he sat down. His hand was steady. 3 days before, Beverly Monroe had appeared in his office doorway and said there was something in the accounts she wanted to walk him through. He had been on a call. He'd said Monday. Beverly had said Monday was fine. He had filed the mention away without assigning it a weight he didn't yet have the information to justify. He looked at Renee's silhouette in 1A. He thought about the phrase she'd used, the accounts, and felt the two things connect in the way a man feels a measurement that is off by more than the tolerance allows. The flight attendant, Sandra, brought his coffee. Sandra had worked Meridian routes for 4 years. She knew who was sitting in row 3. She placed the cup on his tray table and caught his eye once. He gave a small nod. She returned to the galley without a word. He looked at the seat tag in the pocket ahead of him. Meridian Air. His typeface. He looked at it without sentiment. He let the flight proceed. He would be in Miami for 3 days. He would attend the operations meeting. He would fly back on Sunday. Monday morning, he would call Beverly. The year before the September flight, Nathan had spent 6 weekends renovating the sunroom of their house in Buckhead. The room Renee had described with enough specificity that he drafted a rough layout on a notepad, sourced the materials himself, and done the framing over 4 consecutive Saturdays. He hired out the electrical, but handled everything else. When it was finished, she took photographs for her social channels and called it her new creative space. He wasn't in any of the photographs. He hadn't minded at the time. He had noticed the shift that spring. The way her schedule acquired texture he wasn't given access to. Late creative meetings, networking dinners described in broad strokes, a new frequency of vague professional references to someone named Derek, who appeared with the particular regularity of a name being mentioned just carefully enough. He'd told himself she was building something for herself. He respected that. He had always been the kind of man who gave people the room they asked for, without requiring them to explain why. He had extended trust the way he extended it in operations, based on a history of reliable performance, continued until the evidence said otherwise. Victor Osai, who ran Atlanta operations for a competing regional carrier and had tried twice to hire Nathan away, had said something to him once at an industry dinner the previous November, before things changed. Victor had looked at him across the table and said, "The carriers you touch run clean. I've watched it for years. That's not luck." He'd said it simply, without flattery, the way one operator speaks to another. Nathan had thanked him and bought the next round. Beverly Monroe had been watching the accounts for 11 months by the time she appeared in his doorway. Nathan didn't have the full picture yet. He would have it Monday. That was what Renee had never understood, that the man she'd been describing as a logistics executive at dinner parties had been building something she'd never thought to ask about, until the morning Celeste Burke laid the ownership documents on a conference room table, and the number at the bottom changed everything her attorney thought he was working with. Beverly Monroe was 62 years old. Straight-backed, silver-streaked hair she kept short and precise. She had been the holding company's controller since Meridian's 2nd year of operation. She knew the books the way Nathan knew the aircraft, not as documents, but as a living system that telegraphed health or distress to anyone trained to read it. She came to his office at 7:15 on the Monday morning after he landed from Miami. A large accordion file, 2 cups of coffee, a protein bar she set on his desk without explanation. "Eat first," she said. "Then I'm going to show you what I found." He ate. He let her begin. The first section she opened was a printout, 11 months of transfer records from the joint investment account, organized by date and amount. Each entry had a destination routing number. The receiving account was registered to an R. Wade, which was why no automated flag had fired. Beverly had pulled the account registration through their corporate banking contact. The account had been opened 20 months prior. Co-signatory, a Derek Sloan. The transfers were small and regular in the way that someone who understood financial systems would arrange them, never large enough to trigger a review threshold, never frequent enough to form an obvious pattern within any single month. Total over 11 months, $94,200. Nathan read through the full record twice without speaking. He picked up his coffee. He set it back down. "When did you first see it?" he asked. "October," Beverly said. "I logged the first transfer and watched." "You watched for 11 months. I needed you to see all of it at once," she said. "Not piece by piece. I needed you to see the shape." He understood that. On a complex job site, you don't interrupt work to report every individual deviation as it appears. You document it, build the pattern, and present the full picture when you can show what it means. "There's more," Beverly said. She opened the second section. Renee had been listed as an authorized officer on the holding company's household expense account. Nathan had added her 4 years prior, for convenience. That authorization had been used twice in the past year to access financial records she had no operational reason to access. The records she had pulled were the holding company's asset summary statements. She wasn't looking at balances, Beverly said. She tapped the access log with one finger. She was looking at the structure. Nathan was quiet. He stood from the table and walked to the window. Atlanta in the morning. Somewhere south of the skyline, 3 Meridian aircraft were completing their pre-departure turnarounds. He thought about the dinner parties. The phrase logistics executive. 5 years of a woman looking at her husband and seeing something smaller than what was there, and then at some point deciding to look more carefully, finding the structure, and still not finding the right level. "Did she access the Meridian Air Group registration?" he asked. "No," Beverly said. "That tier requires a separate authorization code. She didn't have it." He turned back from the window. "Pull the passenger manifest for Flight 118 to Miami," he said. "Last Thursday. First class." Beverly pulled it up without asking why. She read it aloud. Row 1A, Renee Wade. Row 1B, D. Sloan. Both seats booked on the joint credit card. On Meridian Air. His airline. He stood over everything the way he stood over a full set of blueprints before a complex job, not reading any single, but looking at all of it together. The transfers, the account access, the asset summary records she'd pulled, the flight manifest. Every connection, every line running from one document to the next. He could see the whole shape of it now. "What do you want to do?" Beverly asked. He sat back down. "I want to call Celeste," he said. Beverly said nothing. She refilled his coffee. He didn't move fast. That was the part she had never been able to account for. Celeste Burke had been Meridian's aviation and corporate attorney for 6 years. She moved through complex documentation with the patience of someone who understood that thoroughness was the only strategy that held. She began building the legal framework that Monday afternoon. She filed the civil fraud action covering the unauthorized transfers by end of week. She also brought in a forensic accountant named James Tate, who spent 9 days with the complete transaction history for every joint account going back 3 years. What Tate found was that the $94,200 in transfers was not the complete picture. Over the previous 2 tax years, Renee had redirected $31,600 in consulting income she was contractually required to disclose on their joint filings, into the same Sloan Co. signatory account, reporting it instead as professional expenses. Total undisclosed movement, $125,800. Nathan received Tate's summary on a Wednesday. He read it once. He folded it in half and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He went to his 9A.M. operations meeting. The legal proceedings moved with quiet institutional momentum. Renee's attorney, a man named Ford, family law practice on Peachtree, contacted Celeste twice in November about preliminary settlement terms. Celeste was professionally unhurried both times. She thanked him for reaching out and said the discovery process was ongoing. Renee called Nathan in late October. Her voice carried the practiced lightness of someone extending a resolution they expected to be accepted. "I think we should handle this without it getting complicated," she said. "All right," Nathan said. A pause. The absence of resistance seemed to unsettle her more than argument would have. "I've spoken to an attorney," she said. "I think the process can be straightforward, given where things stand financially." "I agree," Nathan said. She said she hoped he was doing well. She said the last thing she wanted was for this to get ugly. She said she thought they both deserved to move forward cleanly. He said he appreciated that. He ended the call. Beverly was across the conference table. She had been there through the whole call without speaking. She looked at him. "She thinks this is already done," Nathan said. Beverly said nothing. She refilled his coffee. He understood what Renee had done. She had made a thorough assessment of the situation before she moved, exactly the kind of preparation he would have recognized and respected in an operations context. She had accessed the account structure. She had identified what she believed were the load-bearing elements. She had built a plan around what she found. She had simply stopped one level short of the structure that held the actual weight. In aviation, the most consequential errors are not the obvious ones. They are the ones made by someone who completed 90% of their review and stopped. A mechanic who inspects the hydraulics and misses the torque spec on the actuator bolt. A co-pilot who runs the checklist and skips the last 3 items because the last 3 items have never mattered before. The system runs. The system holds weight. Until the moment the load reaches its... She had been building her entire settlement expectation on a model of his finances that was wrong at the foundational level. She had simply never looked at what owned the airline. Celeste filed the response to Ford's second settlement inquiry on a Thursday. She called Nathan at 7:06 a.m. to confirm it was in. "Ford doesn't know what Meridian is," she said. "I know. He's going to walk into that room with a number," she said. "He's going to believe it." "I know," Nathan said. Nathan arrived at the conference room on Peachtree Street 17 minutes early. He liked it that way. The room was on the 14th floor. Neutral walls. Long table, nothing on it yet. A window looking out over the city, mid-morning light coming in flat and level, the kind of light that makes a room look exactly as serious as it is. Celeste arrived at 9:43, followed by James Tate, who arranged his annotated forensic file with the efficient calm of someone who had presented these kinds of findings before and knew what they did to a room. Beverly Monroe arrived at 9:50 and took the chair beside Celeste. Straight-backed, reading glasses. The room was quiet in the particular way of a space that is about to be used for something that cannot be reversed. Ford arrived at 10:01 with Renee and a second attorney named Garrison, who appeared to have been brought in specifically for the financial proceedings. They entered the way people enter when they believe the outcome has already been shaped. Ford had a folder. Garrison had a brief. Renee was composed. She had prepared herself carefully. She glanced at Nathan once when she entered, a quick, calibrated assessment. Then she directed her attention to Celeste, as if Nathan were simply another person who happened to be present. Ford opened with a summary of the proposed settlement framework. He laid out Nathan's financial profile as his firm had assessed it. An operations executive with a senior salary, modest equity holdings, and no significant corporate asset position. He outlined the division of the Buckhead property, the joint investment account, the retirement accounts. He concluded with a settlement figure and presented it with the quiet confidence of a man who believed he had the complete picture. Celeste thanked him. She let everything sit in the room for the appropriate amount of time. Then, she opened her folder. The first document she placed on the table was the Meridian Air Group, LLC operating agreement, dated 9 years prior. Principal member Nathan R. Wade, equity stake, 67%. She set it in front of Ford and let him read. Meridian Air Group, Celeste said, in the level voice she used when information was doing the work, is a regional airline carrier operating 43 aircraft across 16 domestic routes. Mr. Wade's equity position reflects 9 years of active management and original founding capital. She placed the second document beside the independent valuation conducted by a certified aviation business appraiser 8 months prior. She positioned it so the summary line faced the opposing side of the table. Assessed equity value of Nathan R. Wade's 67% stake in Meridian Air Group, LLC, $21.4 million. Ford looked at the document. He looked at it the way a man looks at a number he did not put into the equation and cannot immediately explain. Garrison picked it up. He read it. He read it again. His expression went through several things that he did not fully manage to keep professional. Something moved across Renee's face. She had held herself composed through Ford's presentation, through the first document. She held now, but the effort was visible in a way it hadn't been 30 seconds before. She looked at the valuation summary. She looked at the operating agreement. She looked at Nathan. Nathan looked back at her. James Tate placed the third document, the forensic accounting summary of the $125,800 in unauthorized transfers and undisclosed income. Celeste walked through it without emphasis, factual and precise. The transfers, the co-signatory account, the undisclosed consulting income redirected over 2 tax years. A civil fraud action has already been filed and is in the discovery phase, Celeste said. We are placing this documentation before all parties today so that everyone in this room is working from a complete and accurate picture of the financial landscape. Ford made a note on his legal pad. The note required several lines. The silence lasted 8 seconds. Nathan counted them. We'll give your team a few minutes to review, Celeste said. Nathan stood. He buttoned his jacket. He shook James Tate's hand. He shook Beverly's hand. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned back. Renee was looking at him. He said it quietly, the way he said most things. Not as performance, only for her. You booked first class on my airline, he said, and you still didn't know who was sitting behind you. He walked out without looking back. It did not happen. The civil fraud settlement came through in February. The recovery was $98,000, the documented transfer total and the redirected income, minus what had already been spent. Derek Sloan's commercial development firm was itself the subject of a separate contractual dispute by then. A portion of the funds had been reinvested in a property deal that was not delivering. His case settled in the spring. The money moved no further. Ford restructured the settlement terms 3 separate times before the final agreement was signed. The house in Buckhead was retained by Nathan. The joint investment account was liquidated and distributed per the fraud recovery order. Renee had spent 20 months preparing to leave. The preparation had been careful and incremental and built on a reading of the situation that was wrong at the one level that changed all the others. She was carrying the weight of that the way a person carries something they cannot put down. Not loudly, just constantly, and in a smaller space than she had. Nathan was building something, not fast, the way he built everything, By the following spring, Meridian Air had expanded to 46 aircraft and added 2 new routes. The Atlanta-Charlotte corridor posted a 94% load factor in its first operating month. He had promoted 2 operations managers, both people he had been developing quietly for 2 years without announcement, and a 5th hire was starting in June. He answered every call the same day. He gave accurate timelines, and he hit them. Beverly had given him a model aircraft 11 years ago at the inaugural Meridian flight, a 1/400 scale replica in the original livery, the tail number of the first plane they'd ever put in service. It sat on the windowsill in his office. He noticed it every morning when the light came through that window. He didn't think of it as a symbol. It was just the first one. The rest had followed because he hadn't stopped after that one. On a February morning, Nathan stood on the operations apron at Hartsfield-Jackson, where the first Meridian departure of the day was completing its pre-flight walkthrough. The air was cold and specific, the way winter air is at 5:48 a.m. on a tarmac before the city has fully started. The aircraft's navigation lights were on. His crew moved around the fuselage in the quiet, practiced way of people who know exactly what they are doing and don't need to perform it. He stood there for a moment with his coffee and his notebook and his gray jacket. He thought about a man who had boarded Flight 118 on a Thursday afternoon in September and watched something settle into its final shape from row 3, 4 feet behind people who had no idea whose aircraft they were on. He thought about that man the way you think about a version of yourself that is not that far behind you, with recognition, without grief. He put on his hard hat. His name was above the company mark on the front of it. He walked toward the work. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.